Bob, great to have you on Apple Product Unveiling Day. Was it enough, what they offered?
Well, look, it was a whole bunch of incremental upgrades, Heidi. I mean, it was, camera improvements. Basically, for the standard iPhone 15s, what you got is last year's 14 Pro models is now available in the 15. So it's a better value if you're willing to accept last year's technology. And then for the Pros, the 15 Pro and the Pro Max, there were some nice incremental changes. I think the big news, as you started to hint at, was the pricing, because everybody, it seemed, was expecting price increases. And in point of fact, we basically saw price stability. One small change on the Pro Max, but even there, it really matched the price of last year's configuration with that amount of memory. So essentially flat pricing and yet more capabilities. And so I think people like that, and I think that's a good thing. It's not a wow factor. It's not a foldable phone or something dramatically different, that would get a whole bunch of people excited. But if you're one of the many, many people out there who have a phone, they're like, yeah, you know what, I think it's time for an upgrade. There's plenty of good reasons to justify an iPhone 15 upgrade. So I think you're going to see that. You're going to see those incremental upgrades. And there's some high-end things that people are going to go for the Pro Max. That the prism design on the camera was actually pretty cool. I was kind of surprised by that because they talked about, FYI, it's basically an optical zoom of up to 5x. And some of the rumors had said, oh, it's going to be this telescoping thing. In point of fact, they use these clever prisms. So you're getting 5x optical in a tiny little smartphone. That's pretty impressive engineering.
The Pro Max 9% price increase, is that compelling to you? Does that have the ability, as you say, if people are lured by the new camera capabilities, to potentially change that product mix going into next year?
It might. We'll see what happens. The other thing that was interesting, at least in the U.S., and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in other parts of the world, we saw the U.S. carriers continue their high-level subsidies, because there were also questions not only about the pricing, but the subsidy levels and whether they would continue, because they've been super high in the past. And they did. And so it may be that other carriers around the world that do some of that, obviously that's more of a phenomenon in the U.S. than other places, will also maintain that. But, here's one thing I will say. We've been watching the photography and video features in the iPhone improve incrementally over the last few years. And we're now at the point, I have to admit, while I was watching the presentation today, I was kind of hit me that, wow, high-end cameras, high-end video cameras and DSLRs from the Nikons and Canons of the world, I think we're really starting to see a risk now, because the workflow that Apple is enabling, the quality that they're enabling, really is up to that level. And I think that is going to have a longer-term impact, for that super high end of the market. For mainstream folks, I think you're going to see, hey, this is a nice incremental improvement. But remember, most people are upgrading from a 3 or 4-year-old phone, so it's going to be a massive improvement in quality in that regard. And so I think it will inspire some folks.
When it comes to the high-end versions and the more pricey products out of Apple, how does that bode for those markets that Apple has been targeting, like India, for example, that's more lower income?
Yeah, no, it's a good point, Sherry. And obviously, let's not forget, Apple always keeps some of the older models in the line at lower price points. And those are going to be really important in markets like India, in certain areas of China, more rural China. Obviously, there's the China overhang question about how much impact are these governmental regulations supposedly going to impact Apple. But, what Apple's been very good at doing is waterfalling technology. They'll come out with this technology at the high end, then the next year it's in the mainstream model, and then it goes down to even lower price points. And that's what you're going to see. And a lot of people, again, in developing markets, that first iPhone is going to be so much better than anything they've had access to previously that they're going to be super happy with it. So expectations are different in different parts of the world. And so that works out okay. And it's not like Apple's going to get rid of those super low-end phones for those other markets. They will always be there, and these new ones just become the next benchmark from which they can waterfall down to the other markets.
Bob, let's talk a little bit about that China overhang that you talked about. How big of a risk is it for Apple? Not only the fact that you could have more government regulations, but just consumer backlash. We have seen that market really turn against products from countries like Japan, like South Korea. That would not be anything new, and we have more geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and China now.
No, it's a very fair point, Sherry. The thing I will say that's a little bit different from Apple is that, my sense is that the association of Apple as a luxury brand in China is really strong, and a lot of people really like the Apple brand. And the other big thing to remember is it's the whole Apple ecosystem. Unlike a lot of these other products from other companies, Apple has an ecosystem that they hook you into, and that's true in China just as well as it is in the US and other parts of the world. That makes it harder for a lot of consumers to move away from Apple. So while I think it's a bit of a concern, I don't think it's a huge issue for most of the consumers in China who are big Apple fans.
Bob, I wanted to talk a little bit about the tech side of things, and one, of course, maybe a little bit of a hitch in the vertical integration efforts, right? We saw that renewal of the agreement with Qualcomm, and also at the same time, the news that Huawei, perhaps, despite US sanctions, is making a bit more progress than expected. What do you make of these developments that's kind of going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. I mean, so first of all, on the Qualcomm side, it says a couple of things. First of all, it says obviously that Apple's investment in the Intel 5G modem business is not paying off the way they expect it to. And obviously that's disappointing to Apple. But in truth, this is really, really hard stuff. There's really primarily two companies in the world, and Huawei will keep separate. It's MediaTek and Qualcomm that can make these modem chips and some of the RF chips. And Qualcomm's incredibly good at doing it. And now with this extended contract that Apple has, that means, frankly, Apple people are going to get access to the best modems in the world because Qualcomm, to their credit, has always had the highest performing modems. So I think that one is actually a good thing for Apple people. Clearly, it's good for Qualcomm. To the Huawei point, here's the issue with that Mate 60 phone. Yes, they've created this phone that supposedly is using a 7-nanometer chip. Now, again, folks in the know who follow the semi industry as I do and work with these semi companies, that's been possible for them to do for a while. So it's not a shock that they were able to do it. The bigger question is, what kind of quantity can they actually manufacture? Because over the years in a lot of tech industries, what we've seen is a company can create an amazing product, but they can only make a few of them. And so the question is, can Huawei really produce a large quantity of them? Because yields on that chip are probably very low, which means the prices are very high for them, and that's not a sustainable business. So to me, I don't think the Mate 60 thing is necessarily as big of a deal as a lot of people are making it out to be. I think it's more a flag-waving exercise. We'll see eventually. Of course, time will tell for sure. But my big concern is on that, reproducibility and the long-term large-scale manufacturability of that part that's driving that phone, and I'm not convinced that they've got that figured out yet.